Today we conclude the series I've been doing, the 7 questions that God asks, or when God asks questions. When God asks questions, He does so not to gain information. When God asks questions, He does it to make us think. God doesn't need to know something that He doesn't already know. He already knows what we're thinking. He already knows what's in our heart. He often knows more than what we even understand about ourselves. And so when He asks questions, the purpose of the question is designed to get you to think. And so we've been working through these. Our first one was when God asked Adam, where are you? And this is especially a question that if you're not a Christian, you need to think about. Because basically what God was saying to Adam is, consider where you're at. They had just sinned and they'd eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Adam suddenly realized we're naked and we are disobedient, and he's hiding behind a tree as if a tree is going to stop God from finding them. And God says, Adam, where are you? Not because Adam couldn't be found. It's because God wanted Adam to think about what is your life like now? Now that you have come to understand about your standing with God, what do you know about that? How happy are you about that? The idea of the age of accountability. When a young person suddenly comes in their own mind, I am not right with God. That's the question that God's asking Adam. Do you understand where you're at now? Do you understand you're not where you wanted to be? Do you understand that you're hiding behind a tree because you're standing right now is not what you want it to be? Do you understand that? And then the second question was what he turned and asked Eve, what is this that you've done? He's basically saying, after she tried to pass off, hey, it was a serpent, and Adam already passed it all. It was your fault. You gave me this woman, and she gave it to me to eat, and so I just had to do it. And he says, what have you done? What is your responsibility? How do you see yourself in this drama? You may have a lot of mitigating arguments, and people have them. We have all kinds of arguments for why we do what we do. And I believe that understanding is the first step to getting well, not an excuse to keep doing poorly. I so often deal with people who come in and say, I'm having problems. And why are you having problems? Well, when I was a kid, this happened, or when, this happened to me, or this is the way I am, and it's just the way I am, and so and it's like, it's the first step is understanding what the issues are. The first step. But it doesn't become the excuse in the same way that Eve could have said, the serpent was really convincing and beguiling, and the serpent made it look, and you made it look so good. And it's pleasant, and it's tasty, and God, you didn't have to do that. Why didn't you make them persimmons? Why'd it have to be an apple? I don't know if it was an apple, but why'd you have to make it something that tastes good? Whatever it was, she had all kinds of reasons to blame somebody else, and God says, what have you done? What's your responsibility? And instead of sitting back and saying, I can't help it. That's the way I am. I can't help it. This is what's happened to me. I can't help it. It's my mom and dad's fault, or it's my grandpa's fault, or it's my kid's fault, or it's my husband's fault, or my wife's fault, or it's culture's fault, it's kids at school's fault, it's social media's fault. There's all kinds of mitigating reasons. But what God's asking is, what did you do? Are you ready to take responsibility? The third question was to the rich young man, and he come up and he said to Jesus, good teacher. And Jesus' question was, why do you call me good? Good was reserved as a term for God. God was good. That's what he said, only God is good. Why do you call me good? Because you either think I'm God, or you're flattering me. And you use flattery to distract. You use flattery to manipulate. You use flattery to try to get your way about things. And he says, you're either flattering me so that I'll say, oh, you're such a nice guy. You're so kind to call me like God. And Jesus' question was, why do you call me good? Do you think I'm God? If not, don't call me that. If you do, act like it. That was a point at decision. And if you're here today and you recognize my life is not right, if I stood before God today, I would not want to be there. And I know that I have stuff in my life that I'm responsible for, and I can't blame anybody else. And so the question comes down to, how do I want to take care of it? Do I want to let God, in the form of His Son Jesus, take care of it, or am I going to get something else? And so his question, why do you call me good, was focusing him and us on Jesus is God. Which is, something that's really important, because if He's God, then we have to listen to Him. And this is the point in which you have to decide how to get yourself prepared. The fourth question was one that he asked that Peter answered, and it says, who do you say that I am? And they were already explained, a lot of people think you're this, and other people think you're that, and some people think you're this. And he says, who do you say that I am? And he says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the question we have to answer, and it's much like the confession we make before we're baptized. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Why would that be the confession? Because if Jesus Christ is God's Son, then He is in that position that we need Him to be to save us. He's in that position to demand our allegiance. He's in that position to expect our obedience and following. He's in that place that we look at Him and say, wherever He goes, I've got to go. And as Jesus spent His 3 years in ministry wandering all over the area, His disciples went with Him. Where else am I going to go? I got to be with you. And so if you're at that point, Jesus is asking you, listen, who do you say that I am? Are you going to choose me? That really becomes the point in time when we have to decide what I'm going to do about my situation. I recognize things aren't right. I recognize that I'm at fault. I recognize that there's only really one way. It's either Jesus, who is God, come to earth, or it's something else that is insufficient. And then I have to decide, yes, I'm going to listen to you and follow you. Who do you say that I am? The fifth question was when he asked his disciples, because at this point he's now turning to us who are Christians, more leaning toward us. Now, if you're not a Christian, this is something down the road, and perhaps something that you may be worried about, but the Bible teaches that when you become a Christian, God gives you His Spirit, and He gives you His grace, and He gives you power to do things that don't make sense right now. And so those are things that I would say, just trust God. If you can't trust God, then you can't get Him to save you anyway. So just trust that He'll take care of it. But He asked His disciples, do you think I came to bring peace? This begins this idea about being a Christian isn't about having peace in this life. Following Jesus means that those who don't follow Jesus are not going to keep getting closer to you. Not the intimate way you need them to. It's not to say that everyone just falls off. If you have a non-Christian person in your family, it's not that you'll never be able to be family anymore, but it's just not going to be the same. You can't grow together. It's why I always emphasize with the younger people, if you're going to get married, find someone that's going to walk with you toward God, because that aspect of intimacy is impossible to find if one's trying to follow God and one isn't. What God says is I didn't promise peace on this earth. Things will be difficult. Now, if you act like a Christian, you can make peace with people, and you might make their lives better, but there's no guarantee that your life is going to be better. They may not want to make peace with you. There are times when God says your relationship with Christ as a Christian might separate you. But there's times when you may just have to endure and suffer while you demonstrate Christ-likeness to them. The sixth question was also asked of his followers. He asked this question we talked about last week. What good is it to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul? There's no value balancing my soul and stuff. We're always making a determination, how much does it cost and what do I get from it? And sometimes there may not be a monetary value, it may be an emotional value, it may be an entertainment value, it may be an experiential value, and we add value to something because it means something more. So we'll pay more, we'll up the cost because it's worth it to us for some reason. My brother wanted a Camaro. He paid more for a beat-up Camaro than he did for a beat-up Mustang. But as much Bondo as he put in, he could have took either one and made it look like the other, I guess. But it was more valuable to him because he always wanted a Camaro. He had to have a Camaro when he was a kid. And so the extra cost was worth it because it was his Camaro. Sometimes we walk through life saying, oh, Christianity, here's a value, but it costs. And I got to determine, is it worth the value? And what Jesus' question is I don't care what the cost is, the value is so much greater than don't even ask. If the value of the cost was the whole world, your soul's worth more. What value is it to gain everything and lose your soul? And then the seventh question we'll look at today is, what shall I do? What shall I do? And all my life, it's been the last, I used to do Uplift, and it was always the last night, the last assembly after spending 50 hours teaching all these 1,500 teenagers. We always had the so what lesson. The Bible doesn't have so what in it. I'm trying to look for a question that Jesus said, so what? So what are you going to do about it? And that's the question. What are you going to do about it? Luke 12, beginning verse 16, he told them a parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. This is a parable that Jesus teaches. A wealthy farmer did very well, and he's faced with a question about what to do with all the extra. Now you might say he was blessed. You might say he did the sensible thing. He stored up. He didn't waste it. He stored it up. You might say he was wise. He was going to invest, and he could live off of his investment. And some would say, okay, he's doing what's natural. He's retiring. I can take it easy now for many years. And I can eat and drink and be merry. Some would argue he's just unlucky. He finally got what he wanted the day before he died. Oh, I was talking to a lady whose mom and dad bought their dream home, spent 2 years getting it all fixed up, and as soon as they finished it and said, we're done, they both died. Like they finally got their dream home, and they were able to enjoy it for like maybe a week. And then it was gone. How unlucky. That's what you might argue. This guy's just unlucky. God pours blessings on him, and he says, oh, here we go. I've got it made. Finally, God's blessed me. And that really sounds a lot like a lot of modern Christianity of just do the right thing and God will pour blessings on you, and then you can relax. And it has nothing to do with what the reality of Christianity is. But it wasn't the actions that he did, because he might have done some things that are sensible. He might have done some things that were proper or right. He might have even done the right thing, but the heart underneath it all was wrong. The parable was preceded by a question that was asked of Jesus. Two brothers were arguing about inheritance. Now, there was a law. Older brother got 2 parts, everybody else got 1 part. And they come and they say, Jesus, will you be the arbiter between us? The problem is it's not a question of who gets 2 parts, who gets 1 part. Oh, I'm not sure he's dividing that right. I understand that with 8 kids. Every time they wanted to split something, we had a rule. One person breaks it or cuts it, the other person gets to pick. You know, if I let my older ones cut it, and then they would get to pick the big part, it was always so. If you're going to cut it not fair, you're going to miss out. And so they would, I had one boy that would measure. He'd get a ruler. He wanted to make sure he'd made it as exactly in the middle as possible. And here's these brothers are arguing. They're not arguing about whether it was fair or not. They're arguing about, well, how much do I get? I think I should get a little more from my part. No, I think I should get a little more from my 2 parts. No. And then if you couldn't agree, you would go to an arbiter. And they said, Jesus, will you be the arbiter? And Jesus says, why would you think I would be your arbiter? In fact, the question is, you got to be cautious about being greedy. Quit being greedy. And if you're not being greedy, this is not going to be a problem. Then he tells the parable. And then after the parable, he follows by a section detailing things like on the Sermon on the Mount. Why do you worry about what you're wearing? And why do you worry about the food you're going to eat? And why do you worry about where you're going to sleep? And why do you worry about how long you're going to live? God takes care of these things. God will take care of you. Trust in God. In the parable, Jesus says the man is a fool, because he invested everything in preparing for this life when he should have been using this life to prepare for eternal life. Amen. That's what Jesus was explaining after the parable. You worry about all these things. What you worry about is putting God first. First seek him. Or in Matthew, as he put it there, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. You'll be taken care of if you seek God first. And so the issue is not, is it okay to discuss these things? Is it okay to have these things? No, the problem he's saying is that you're worried about this life when you should be worrying about eternal life. You worry about this world when you should be worrying about God stuff. Jesus wants his followers to focus on God things and not material things. Not that material things are wrong. Not that having stuff is wrong. Not that planning and preparing and all is wrong. But not above or before God things. And this is illustrated by one other passage, James chapter 4. James chapter 4, verse 13. James writes, now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, we'll spend a year there, we'll carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or do that. As it is, you boast and brag, and all such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins. The question, what shall I do, that we started with? It's a mark of maturity to have the ability to plan ahead. Nothing wrong with planning ahead. It's a mark of maturity to work hard. That's not what is being condemned here. It sounds like it when I'm going to go and work hard for a year and make money. I'm going to go and plan to do this. I'm going to figure it out. I'm not just going to get up in the morning and say, who's going to feed me? Who's going to take care of me? It sounds like he's saying, all that planning, that hard work is wrong. But he's not saying that. He's saying good things can become bad things. Good things can become wrong things. When? Well, it's the same as the man in the parable. When he says, what is your life? What is your life about? And what the answer is in these two passages is basically the men are saying, my life is about making money. My life is about getting life is about gaining a lot and taking life easy. And God says, no, your life's a mist. It just burns away. Those mornings when you get up and it's hot, but it's not yet hot, right? And you get that morning mist and you drive along and sometimes you see that. It's really out on golf courses. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because you can see them better on golf courses. And you see this mist. When I lived on the West Coast, we'd go out and we'd golf, and sometimes we'd golf in the morning or the evening, and we get the fog. We didn't have anything but fog on the West Coast as an issue. And you'd get out there and say, don't worry, it'll burn off by the third hole. And it usually did. And what did it leave behind? Well, it kind of wetted things and it blessed it for a moment, but long term, it was gone. It was done. He says your life is like that. Not that your life is meaningless. Not that your life doesn't affect things. Not that you shouldn't affect things. But if you think about your life here, this life here is literally a mist. Your earth life, your world life, your I gotta live here life is relatively brief and relatively not impactful. I love reading history, especially history of forgotten people. Why are they forgotten people? Because most of us are forgotten by most people. Very few people live on in infamy forever. Sometimes it's bad. No one will ever let us forget Hitler, because anytime you do something that somebody doesn't like, they call you Hitler, right? You'll never forget that. You'll never forget maybe George Washington. His name may live on forever. I don't know. There's a few people whose names last forever besides Jesus. But for the most part, I'll even do Bible stories, and I'll read them right out of the Bible, and you'll say, where is that at? I never heard of that guy. Hadn't thought of that. I never heard a sermon on that. Why? Because life is like that. Life here is forgettable. If that's our focus, then what we've left behind is nothing. When we focus on life here, it's like the mist. All of a sudden it burns off and everyone forgets about it. Because there's nothing left behind. He says instead, be rich toward God. Be rich toward God, not this life. And he says, he that knows to do good and fails is sin. If you know the right thing to do and you don't do it, that's wrong. Sometimes we might, there's a passage, I was looking at Luke, I read down the rest of the chapter, down at the end of Luke, starting in verse 47. He says things, a whole nother sermon, I'm not going to deal with it, but he says, listen, if you know what to do right, if you know what God wants, you know what the master wants, and you don't do it or you don't prepare, you'll get a lot of beatings. If you don't know what the master wants, you might get a few beatings. But he's basically saying, if you know what to do and you don't do it, that's worse than if you didn't know. And he's just now turned and said, now you know. If you live for this life and you don't do what's right, it's going to be worse. If you know to do good and you don't do it, he says, it's sin. It's wrong. It's worse. And in James, it's not about as much about greed. That's the parable in Luke. But here's about pride. He says, we'll go and do this, and we'll go and do that, and I'll go make this money, and I'll go that part, and it's what I'm going to do. You leave God out of the planning. I takes the center stage that belongs to God. That's the issue. When you're a Christian, you have to understand that I no longer am on the center stage. I'm no longer the star of my show. I'm no longer at the top of the heap. I'm no longer sitting on the throne of my heart. I'm not in charge. I don't make all the plans. Is it wrong to plan? No. But it's not about my plan. It's about God's plan. What does God want me to do? How does God want me to live? Where does God want me to go? What success does God want for me? How does God define success? And that's a problem that it's a this world-oriented attitude or a Lord's will-oriented attitude. That's the challenge for us who are do as if there's a magical plan. I know for 42 years I've been one of the experts at church growth. I have more books on church growth and I understand more ways, and I've helped. Every church I've been at has grown. Okay? I want it to grow, but it's not because that's my target. I learned a long time ago it doesn't work. I have a friend who used to go. He would go down to a meeting and he'd hear about, oh, this church that's growing does this. He'd come back and says, we're going to do this because it's going to make us grow, and it didn't. And then he'd go to another meeting and he'd come back and say, we're going to do this. Why? Because growing churches do this and we do this, and the church would get smaller. And he'd go, and the church went from 950 to about 200. But they kept bringing in all these projects and all these systems and all these things that are supposed to help the church grow. And the question I always ask is that what the Lord wants of you? Is that what makes you successful? Some of the most successful churches I worked at were small churches that accomplished great things for people. They didn't necessarily get much bigger. I was at a little church, and we were working in Kansas, and there were 3 different couples who basically were banished from Church of Christ down there because they had been divorced and remarried, and it was very strict down there, and they couldn't go to church, and they couldn't find people to love them or take care of them, and we brought them in, and we rescued them, we saved them. They got very faithful. When we finally closed those doors, they went on to have very profitable Christian walks and worked in other churches and did very well. And our church closed because we weren't being successful. And I said, we are. Well, I think we should be bigger. I think we should grow. It's all about bigger. It's all about getting more. It's that baby boomer mentality of bigger is better, right? Everything is better when it's bigger. Well, not always. What's the Lord's plan? I don't know what the Lord's plan is here. I don't know if Bob's going to get his church at 200, or if he's going to say 60s and 70s is great for you. Do something good. The question is, what's the Lord's will for us right now here, and are we doing that? Because this world-oriented mindset is different than God's will-oriented mindset. And when we start arbitrarily demanding that things happen a certain way, or we follow this plan, it's going to happen, it doesn't happen. And it might not be the Lord's will. I know, I went to a church. We doubled in size in the first 3 months. And it almost destroyed the church. Because they weren't prepared to do whatever God wanted. They were still stuck with this world-oriented attitude. I don't know what God's plan is for you individually. How successful you're going to be, how wealthy you're going to be. I don't know what God has laid out in His mind as a possibility for you, but if you're focused on this world and getting ahead of this world, if you do, be cautious, because the timing might be when God turns and says, "You fool, you got what you were looking for, and now someone else is going to enjoy it because I'm taking you away. Your life is over. You should have used it to accomplish something right now instead of just saving it up for yourself." Have a different God perspective attitude, God's will attitude. Oh, this is not, I'm not saying this because, oh, this is fun, isn't it? This is great. No, this is the hardest thing there is. That's why it's the last question. This is why we don't do it very well. It's hard for us to live in this world and not have a this world matters attitude. The hardest thing is to say, you know what, I'm just going to go where the Lord leads, because it's, I don't know about that. And are you allowed to do that? And trust me, in my line of work, it often leads to disaster, because I might be the only one who's thinking about what God's will is, and are evaluated by that kind of success. But the question you have to ask yourself, if you're a Christian, is this last one. What will I do? What will I do with what I have? Am I going to think about it from a this world perspective attitude, or am I going to think about it from a God? Nieces or nephews, or the people around you, the people that go to school with you, or the people that work with you, or the people that live around you, the people that go to the gym with you, whatever it is that you do, how are they being affected by you? Are you thinking about God things, or are you thinking about a this world thing? And when we find ourselves engaged in a this world thing, that's when we wake up one day and say, I got nothing, and I'm not prepared. And hopefully you have 20, 30, 40 years to prepare for the Lord to come get you. Unfortunately, it's not guaranteed. It's not promised. Right now, what will you do? Right now, what's important? Right now, are you going to do a God's will-oriented lifestyle, or are you going to keep living a I'm in charge, this world's important lifestyle? That's the question that Jesus asks. And there's a reason why many of the followers would just start walking away. Because it's a challenge. It's not easy. It's not fun. But when you find yourself into living a God's will lifestyle, and you get that in your mindset, then when you start doing God's will, you'll enjoy that. That's what's pleasurable. That's what's pleasing. That's what success, that's what you accomplish. And you look forward to the point when you stand before God, and God has this list of things that were accomplished because of what you did, and He says, here's your success. It may not have seemed like it in this life, but in God's terminology, in God's in what God considers really, really important, you've accomplished a great deal. That's when you stand there and He says, well done, good and faithful servant. And you say, I look forward to seeing all the benefits, the blessings, the people who were impacted by me, and I get to spend eternity hearing about it, even things I didn't know. What about you? Where in those 7 questions do you find yourself? And if you're here this morning and you find yourself needing to do something about it, if you're not a Christian and you're ready to become one, if We're ready to witness your repentance and confession and baptism. If you're not a Christian and you need to learn more about it, we're ready to talk to you about that. If you're a Christian and you need to get your life back in order because it's not in alignment with God, and you need to get that back in alignment, then we're here to help you and to pray with you. If you are a Christian but you haven't been walking with the Lord and you're doing wrong and you need us to pray for you and help you start again, whatever that is, whatever your needs are, we invite you to the front as we stand and we sing the song together.
What can wash away my sin?